I think we've got an interesting panel. Dr. Narayan has been a career diplomat, career bureaucrat, and he's been uh, part of the Tamil Nadu growth story right from the 1960s. And then we've got Vivek, who was born in India, who's traveled a lot in India and now gone to the US and is looking at Tamil Nadu from an outsider's perspective. And then Karthik, who was born in the US and then always come back to India and looking at things from his own perspective. So thanks, Karthik. I just want Dr. Narayan to elaborate on some of the points that you made, and it'll be interesting to know his views about the delivery, the capability of the state. Dr. Narayan, what has been so unique about the delivery capability of Tamil Nadu? You've talked a lot in your book about how uh, people from all kinds of socio-economic background were made part of the government, like how the traditional hereditary village heads were actually removed and were replaced with VAOs from different socio-economic background. How do you think that has contributed to the delivery mechanism of the state, and what are your experiences in dealing with the new people who came into the governance system?
Um, Thanks. Karthik mentioned about institutional delivery capabilities, and Vivek stressed on the demand for services. So, and I think it's very important to understand that the demand for services has to be met by a supply of the services, and this is what I would call it the Dravidian change enabled. And one of the way in which they enabled was that the moment you bring in reservations, and the moment you bring in reservations for the differently for the castes and communities which have not been had the opportunity to rise to different positions in the government, automatically you are bringing in the people who are demanding into the supply capability. Okay, so if you remove the village officer system, where the zamindar would be the village headman, the Brahmin would be the village headman, the landowner would be the village karnam, and the other functionaries would belong to the lower caste, and completely change it over to say that no, this is not the way it will work. It will work according to a norm where all communities, all castes can go to all posts. This entire social power structure changes, which means, which the point that Vivek means, it's easy for a person to walk into a Tahsildar's office, Taluk office, or a block office, because a block office guy comes from the same kind of background that this guy who is demanding the service comes from. And I think this is I'm glad Karthik's brought it about. This is the big change that has happened in Tamil Nadu, that the service deliverer and the service seeker, in a way, come from very, very similar social backgrounds. It's easy supply. I'll give you a specific example. The Tamil Nadu Medical Supply Corporation, okay, where they have now said that all medicines for the public health systems will be provided centrally by all the labels and the delivery. I've described it in detail in the book. Now, the person who thought it through and who made it happen, a young colleague of mine, now he has been engaged by the World Bank to try the same system in Bihar and in Orissa. He's been struggling for the last 3 years and failed. It's not working. And it is primarily because the system, the delivery system that Karthik talked about, the delivery system does not belong to the same ethos, which is the demand system. And I think this is the very, very big difference that Tamil Nadu can boast of. And therefore, when you have a system like the midday meal system, I mean, there are people who can judge, okay, 6 grams of oil per child per day, cooking oil per child per day, multiplied by 7 days into the number of schools, into 1,468 schools to be delivered on a weekly basis to the school, because there is no preservation facility in the school, the entire hierarchy works. You see, today in districts in UP, let us take the COVID case. Excellent collectors, excellent senior officers are running around trying to sort out the COVID cases, but without any staff. The staff are afraid to come out. They don't even come out of their homes, which is not the case in Tamil Nadu. Everybody is working together as a team because they also know that they come from the same villages where the trouble is arising. This social cohesion in delivery and supply and demand is something which is absolutely unique in Tamil Nadu, much more so even in Kerala, because Kerala is a slightly different story altogether.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you for your answer. So, does anybody else within the panel have got any questions to Dr. Narayan?
So I would like to make a point regarding Dr. Narayan sir's actually it's very insightful. So just a point of information, the amount of social prestige involved in delivering such, the last mile delivery being done, as Narayan sir said, they both are close. Both the person was seeking the help and comes from the same background. And when the issue gets sorted out, the amount of social prestige that he gets in solving out such issues gives a huge impetus to and enables everyone to do the same. So just a point of information, because I have seen it in my own village in Tanjore, where we always have a very good road. I have always envied on how can they have such a good roads being delivered all the time. And it was very simple fact that people from the same village were a part of the government of Tamil Nadu, and they took it upon themselves to deliver that good roads to the village every time someone comes to that position. So just a point of information. Thank you so much, sir.
Let me just give one more example. A couple of years back, Ms. Jayalalitha started this Amma canteens, okay, where you're supplying idli at 1 rupees and food at 5 rupees a day. It is not a question of supply. You just think about it, that every morning, the ladies who are cooking in each Amma canteen, they would make 1,000 idlis or 1,500 idlis and sell it at 1 rupee a day. So let us think, what is their motivation? Why are they doing it? Why are they doing it in 500 to 1,000 locations all over? If they did not feel empathetic, it is not for the money. The money they were paid were maybe 2,000 rupees a month, 3,000 rupees a month. Maybe they stole some of the idlis to take home. Maybe, okay, there's a lot of leakage, etc. But whatever it is, those idlis got delivered every day. Sambar rice got delivered every day. And this is precisely what you are saying, that the empathy between the supplier and demand, it's something very, very unusual here.
Thank you, sir. One of the questions that I had, which I thought of asking the panelists, Dr. Narayan in particular, is how this journey was planned. Was there a grand vision at the beginning of 1970s on where Tamil Nadu should be in another 50 years? Or was it because of small incremental and irreversible steps which the political leadership of Tamil Nadu and the bureaucrats of Tamil Nadu had in their mind? Was there a grand vision, or was there small plans which we had to deliver in line with the election cycle?
1967 was a significant change from the Congress government to the DMK government at that time. Anadure was there for a short time. He passed away in 1969, and after that it was primarily Kananya. there was a vision, and it was not a vision which was unknown. The vision was part of the DMK ideology from at least 1957-58 onwards. Once they started articulating it, once they started having a presence in the assembly, they were very clear that what they wanted to deliver was social development, not just welfare alone, not just welfare. What Karthik said, development. They were respectful of the kind of industrialization that Tamil Nadu had had. They wanted continuity in that development, but they wanted that continuity to be all inclusive. And I have again mentioned in my book that initially the bureaucracy was reluctant. They were not used to. They were not used to this kind of this thing because they belonged to an earlier generation. A lot of those seniors went away. They went away to Delhi, they retired, etc. And the new crop of people who came in were very much in tune with this requirement of the government, and they got into this performance very willingly. So yes, there was a plan, a grand plan. The grand plan was to make sure, because if you look at the kind of policies that happened between particularly 1971 and 75, those 4 or 5 years, one after the other, slum clearance board being set up, the sort of, as I said, village officers I have already talked about, the Adi Dravida welfare departments being set up, the kind of assistance which is being given to poor and backward people. It came at a cost. And what did they, very subtly, where did the cost come from? The irrigation and the infrastructure budgets in those 4 or 5 years came down because the focus was that, okay, irrigation and infrastructure, roads and all that can wait. And particularly, as I said, in a state where the agriculture dependence, the number dependence was high, but the GDP dependence was low, it was possible to move that money into welfare. And if you see the skew that happened in the budgets at that time, it was all towards welfare. And it worked. It worked because after 77, 1977, 80, when the new institutions started coming in, people were ready to take on the facilities that were being provided by the institution. So yes, there was a grand plan. It was an ideological plan. It was an ideological plan driven by the political hierarchy, which was willingly, I would use the word again, willingly accepted and adopted by the bureaucracy and delivered down to the last. It's not the IAS officers alone. The village officer has to deliver. The Tasildar has to deliver. The BDO has to deliver. It was willingly accepted as the right thing to do. And that, I think, is a big story of Tamil Nadu.
So, I think we we should also do service to another really great Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, Kamarajar, who played this pivotal role, in my sense, in setting a trajectory for the country. So Kamarajar was in this very interesting place. He was responding to Periyar on the one hand with this demand for social reform. He was responding to Rajaji on the other hand, who was very focused on industrialization and who wanted a more liberalized kind of economy. He was responding to the communists on the other hand. So he was able to blend all of these together and put together a system where the kind of socialism that he brought in was a socialism of expanding basic public services. So if you think about who started providing, making education a major part of the idea that everybody should be educated, where did that start from? The schooling expansion started with Kamarajar. Midday meals also started expanding in a significant way under Kamarajar. In fact, the interesting thing is, while MGR gets talked about as the person who made midday meals a major thing in Tamil Nadu, by the time MGR expanded school feeding, it was already reaching 2/3 of the children. He universalized it, but it was already a huge program by that time. starting with a major expansion. There were experimental midday meal things started in the Madras Corporation and so on in 1923, but it started expanding during Kamaraj's regime. So he was able to blend this various ideologies in this beautiful period in Tamil history with so many different ideologies, so many visions that were in place. He was able to give some priority to industrialization on the one hand, which allowed the state capacity to deliver also to increase because you need more pie to be able to distribute. And also at the same time make social welfare, education, school feeding, and other things a big part of the Tamil governance scheme of things. The other chief ministers to come have expanded it and have pushed it in unprecedented ways. But I feel like Kamarajar played an extremely critical role in making this vision that has kind of been sustained by everybody else. So Dr. Narayan,
No, I totally, entirely agree, because it was in Kamaraj's time that the rural electrification scheme started. And particularly, he encouraged the use of agricultural pump sets. He set up the rural road scheme by which all villages could be linked with at least if not at least a metal road kind of thing, all access to villages. Because he again, please think of it. It's part of the same story, because he came from a background where he could understand the pain and the demand, and therefore he was in a position to supply, which was not so with the earlier, I would say, the zamindar kind of a chief ministers. And okay, his political pulls and pressures apart, he genuinely felt that this was the right direction. The most important thing is he took great advantage of the community development scheme which was introduced by SKD at the center. Created the entire Panchayat Union setup, the block setup was created during that particular point of time. And this delivered through the Gram Sevaks important services, particularly agriculture supporting services through the Gram Sevaks. All Kamraj, absolutely. But I go back to the story. Because these deliveries, this supply was this supply, but remember, this was not a demand-based supply. This was a supply-based demand. Okay, this was supplied, but it was supplied in a manner that it was what people demanded. The later year, the demands made the supply happen. This is the big difference between the Kamraj years and the Kalaignar years.
So I'm curious to also hear from Karthik on this notion of state capacity that you talked about. See, there is a Mickey Mouse version of state capacity. I mean, it's a huge literature, right? So I can't summarize it enough. But the idea is that you need highly skilled people, you need technology, you need more money, you need more people, right? So you supply that and governance will improve because that improves state capacity. Whereas in a certain sense, I think what Dr. Narayan and I are talking about, I mean, I don't know your work enough, but I want to hear from you. It's not so much that you don't necessarily improve state capacity by putting the most educated people who may actually not be from the same ethos, right? Who won't have the same, not just empathy, but also an understanding of the lives of people that you're serving to. And thus, your ability to design things, this govern in a way that the state works is compromised. What's your understanding of state capacity?
Yeah, fantastic. So I'll say a couple of things in response. So the first thing that came to my mind was the China story. So there's a bunch of good books about sort of like how sort of Chinese governance enabled China's growth story. But by now, there's many that have been written in the last few years, and one of them in particular is I love that one, and I know the author and all this, so I've talked to her about it. And one of the points that she makes, she's a political scientist at Michigan,
is that, so decentralization was a key part of the China story. Okay, so county level officials, even city level officials had a lot of sort of leeway to be able to pursue sort of the broad objectives that were set down by the Communist Party of China, right? Obviously China has been a great success story in terms of growth, and obviously we could argue about other things, but in terms of growth, I think it's undeniable. So you would have thought, oh, surely those people at sort of the lower levels were, highly educated, really capable. It's not the case. Those people, she documents in her book, a lot of those people just had high school education, right? So I mean, they did not have, they did not know all the sort of development theories, experiences from other places, and they didn't really have much of that at all, right? And so actually, that is one sort of small example of the broader point that she wants to make, which is essentially that you have to work with what you have, right? I mean, state capacity doesn't go from 0 to 100 just like that. It doesn't happen. It's exactly as you said, Vivek. At least my view is that it's exactly as you said, that it's actually iterative, right? That you have to start with where you are, do what you can, and build from there, and there's going to be a co-evolution between what you can do and the demands that are placed upon you by citizens and by firms and whoever else, right? So I think that's one key point to make. I think the other point that also relates to something that you said is that one of my teachers in grad school is a guy called Lant Pritchett, and he's written a lot about India, and he's lived in India and all this stuff. And one of the things, he's been working on this issue of state capacity now for, I don't know, the better part of 15 years. And one of the points that he's made in some recent talks that he's given is that oftentimes when we're thinking about how to build state capability, state capacity, whatever you want to call it, is that we think about exactly the elements that you highlighted, right? So it's the IT, it's the skills, it's the, it's the recruitment systems and all this. And all these undoubtedly, no one would deny that these can be really useful things, right? I mean, that's a given. The point is that when you have a fundamentally broken organization, or a broken is maybe a strong word, but a low capability sort of system or organization, all those other things are peripheral. Your IT systems, your hiring systems, all that. Because what you've lost, the core of what you've lost is your purpose and your technical sort of core, your technical sort of capability, right? That's essentially what any organization is trying to do, right? Is they have to have a purpose, and they have to have some baseline sort of technical competence capability to be able to pursue that purpose, right? And if you don't have that, you can tweak along the margins on your HR, on your performance management, on your IT, whatever. It's probably not going to get you very far, right? So I think that's a really important point to internalize. And I share that view that actually what we're talking about, and Tamil Nadu, I think this echoes a lot of what both Dr. Srinivasan and Dr. Narayan have been saying, is that there was already sort of a core, a purpose in place that came out of the social movements, that came out of the party ideologies. There was already a purpose there, right? And so that I think that was the foundation upon which the actual organizational capabilities of different parts of the government were able to deliver, right? Whereas I think if you look across India, for example, certainly you look across many parts of the world, that core purpose and that core sort of technical sort of competence to be able to pursue that purpose, that technical mandate, it's just missing, or it's really weak, right? And so oftentimes when we're talking about state capability, we're just talking on the margins, because we're not talking about how to actually reinvigorate that core, right? And I think it's a really hard problem, because I think precisely in the case of Tamil Nadu, that came out of history, essentially, if you want to boil it down. I mean, it came out of sort of decades and decades of social mobilization and movements that coalesced over a long period of time. That's not something that policy can act upon, right? So I think it does present us a challenge as to, okay, how then do you actually reinvigorate the purpose of these core state functions to be able to deliver? I don't have a good answer to that, but I think somehow that is the core question to grapple with, rather than, is this performance management system better or that one? I mean, I think that those are all I would like to argue that those are second order questions as compared to sort of this core question.
So Saravan,
Thanks.
if I may,
Yeah,
there's
go
another
on, Vivek.
issue that's been bugging me for a while, and since we have Dr. Narayan who's so experienced, I really want to use his presence to ask this. So as a part of my doctoral work, I spent a lot of time talking to people who were activists, administrators, etc., in the early part of India's independence, and also spent a lot of time in block offices and collectors' offices and so on a few years back. The one thing that was very striking was some of the people who were working in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. The bureaucrats had such pride in their work. So they would often talk to me about, they went to these places where there was nothing and they created this, the kind of development that they created. And so there's a tremendous sense of pride in what they had done. I don't find the same thing among a lot of people who are working currently. I mean, that they seem to be a lot more frustrated with day-to-day activities. There's a lot of tremendous amount of tension, tremendous amount of difficulty. A lot of people work fairly hard, but the same kind of pride is lacking. You've been in the system for a long time. I'm very curious to know what happened and how can we change that?
Actually, I have kind of looked at this in an earlier book. It's called Documenting Reforms in India. It's a 2004 publication, which looked at the way in which the 1991 to 2000 reforms were rolled out. And it's kind of a Macmillan India publication. But what I have argued there is that in each sector there have been performers, great performers, and these performers have driven change and development. I mean, I have identified. For example, if you look at the financial sector today, the markets, the Bombay market today, whether you take the stock exchange, whether you take the SEBI, whether you take the National Stock Depository, whether you take the way in which the settlements happen, it's among the best in the world. The restrictions are more due to currency and cross-border trading restrictions. But in terms of internal performance, it's among the best. I mean, T+1, T+2, the settlement system we introduced when only New York was doing it. The rest of the world was not doing it. So there, and look at the national highways, the NHAI program. Okay, it was conceptualized. It was conceptualized at a policy, at a political level, at this thing. But to deliver, even today, it's being delivered. To deliver something like 8,000 kilometers of road, 4-laning and 6-laning of road, it's to do with people. So yes, there are. I mean, if you take a cohort of, let us say, about 3,000 top officers in various positions across the country, I think it would fall by and large in the same kind of bell curve that everything else would fall. You would find about 30-40% great performance and 20-30% poor performance and middle average. And mind you, performance at that time had its own reward. In fact, pecuniary reward especially attached to the position one was occupying, I use this word very, very softly, was never a consideration. Was never a consideration to these officers. And I know a lot of officers retiring on very meager pensions, but extremely happy. I mean, the school teacher used to be very, very happy with the way in which his student got marks in mathematics. Okay. So yes, there is a change. There is a change for more a materialistic benefit. I would use the word benefit. And that change is there. But that doesn't mean performance, because I mean, I sit in Chennai today and I see the way in which if Mr. Chief Minister announces 2,000 rupees to be given to every ration card holder, it happens. It happened not because of the chief secretary or the secretary. It happened because the ration card boy is also serious about delivery. So yes and no. I agree with you that yes, you have a lot of complaint, lot more complaint, because the state is in many more aspects than at that particular time. The only caution is that when you talk to the senior people and they say, I changed in my duration this district into this, I hesitate at that kind of a statement because it's very different from what you have said in your argument. That is, people want a particular change and that change happens. So and I leave you to decide which is better.
Talking about bureaucracy, I want to bring in our executive coordinator, Puhal Gandhi, who deals with bureaucrats day in and day out. And Puhal sir, like, do you have any views on the level of involvement that the current crop of bureaucrats are having in terms of delivery versus something that has happened in previous years? Do you have any questions to Dr. Narayan or Vivek about bureaucracy? Sir, you're on mute.
Yeah,
We're not able to hear you.
I'm not sure whether it is the right question to me because I'm not a bureaucrat.
No, you deal with a lot of bureaucrats.
You are having a great bureaucrat in the panel, so I don't think this is a right question to me. But in any ways, I have one question to Dr. Narayanan regarding the delivery to the last mile. That is, when you spoke about 6 grams of oil to each and every student in the noon meal system without any adequate storage facility. This applies to everything. In fact, oil, eggs, or rice, all these things. But should we say that this is due to the efficiency in the last mile deliverability or decentralization of the governance or maybe devolution of powers to the local body, which not only the Dravidian movement is responsible for, but even the other political parties are also responsible for? How do you see that, sir?
So far as the local bodies are concerned, I think we lost track sometime about the early 70s. And MGR and subsequently Jayalalitha did not believe very much in empowering panchayats and local bodies. It was only in 1996, after the DMK came back into power, that local bodies elections were held after nearly 20 years or so, nearly 18, 20 years or so. So there was a vacuum, even among cooperative societies, even among cooperative banks, etc. They were all being run by bureaucrats. But we have seen, as Vivek has said, we have seen an earlier period, the pre-67 period, where the district boards and the panchayat unions and the local bodies are extremely influential, powerful, and effective. So I can only say that, unfortunately, politically, unfortunately, we saw a vacuum in the middle where local bodies were not particularly effective. And this vacuum was filled to some level by political functionaries of the party who were pressing for, who became local representatives of the people, and to some extent by bureaucracy. So it's not a happy answer, but this is what happened.
Maybe when we just see about the management of our COVID situation by the central government, can we attribute the absence of this last mile deliverability by the central government or the policy making of the central government for the whole of India instead of delegating it to the states under the Disaster Management Act? Can we say that there is a deficient way of, or there is a defective way of addressing it? Because they decide what age group that we have to vaccinate in a particular state, or who should be vaccinated first and who should not be vaccinated first throughout the country. Plus, there are also opinions saying that in a particular area, say for example, if you take a privileged panchayat or maybe even a council, first everyone in that council should be vaccinated. Otherwise, again, it will lead to spread. Even if 5 people are not vaccinated, whether they are children or whether they are within the group of 18, it will lead to the spread, and the spread cannot be contained. So, do you think that drawing parallel with this 5-gram oil to the students, the decision for implementing any decision with respect to COVID should be left to the states and also to the local panchayats or local body for last mile delivery.
You very, very, very good example. But look at the contradiction. The first round, the center said that we will manage total delivery, we will manage supply, we will manage distribution, etc. Up to the last mile. We will give it to the state. State has to do it according to the particular. You will shout from the states, saying, no, 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 you're taking away our powers, etc. Then the government of India this time said, okay, you buy, you do it yourself, you're willing to buy. Huge shout from the states saying, no, 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 you should give it to us free, and then leave us to free. So you can't get it right. You can't get it right. But in response to your other this thing, look at the states which are able to manage the vaccination well, and look at the states which are not able to manage the vaccination drive badly. And you go back to Karthik's question of state capacity. It has nothing to do with the central government or so. The last mile delivery depends very, very much on the state capacity, and the state capacity varies enormously. Enormous. There are historical reasons to this. I mean, if you permit an old man a little leeway, talk about, you just think about how the state capacity comes about. See, India in the British this thing was not uniformly administered. If you take states like Rajasthan, if you take states like Gujarat, if you takes like parts of Uttar Pradesh, they were all princely states, 600 princely states. If you take West Bengal and Orissa, they were all zamindari states. One man had the power of life and death over maybe 1 lakh families or much more. Whereas if you take the presidencies, particularly of Tamil Nadu, the Madras presidency and the Bombay presidency, it was administered as an administrative unit, which means the land was registered in the name of the riots. There was proper settlement, there was proper revenue collection, etc. So the state capacity developed over the last 200 to 300 years in these areas. That is why Maharashtra, Gujarat do so much better. That's why Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu do so much better. And that is why certainly Rajasthan, practically there are no land records. There is no land settlement. So there is no hierarchy. What will the Patwari do? Where will he go? So, as Karthik says, state capacity and how it evolves defines fundamentally nothing to do with center and the states, because states will shout. No matter what you do, states will shout.
Thank you, sir.
One of the questions that I want to ask the panel was about the impact of key geopolitical events on the policy making within the state. Like if you take the early 90s, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the liberalization took place. Dr. Manmohan Singh and Mr. Narasimha Rao brought in a lot of economic reforms. And I want to know the views of the panel about how Tamil Nadu was able to adapt its economic policies in the 90s following that, and also how the technological development took place in the early 2000s following the Y2K crisis. I want to start with Karthik. Have you had any thoughts of these geopolitical events on local policy making?
A bit, but I'm sure Dr. Narayan and Dr. Srinivasan can probably speak to this much more than I can. But I'll just say a couple of things. So one is, as we've been talking about, I think for all sorts of reasons, actually, the sort of skill base in Tamil Nadu, the preparedness to sort of absorb investment, right? I think was higher in Tamil Nadu than it was in many other states, right? So when you're doing a big reform like India did in the early 90s, those are the places that are going to benefit, right? Because there's sort of an explosion of activity after this sort of big set of reforms, and Tamil Nadu certainly sort of capitalized on that, right? So the policy framework I'm less familiar with. I'm sure that Dr. Narayan can speak to that, but in terms of some of the sort of governance aspects, I can say a bit about that. So one of the things that I found out is that because of this sort of ongoing political commitment in the state to sort of enabling industrialization, actually there was not much hesitation on the part of senior leadership in the state to basically do what needed to be done, right, to secure investment, right? So I think a great example of that is the auto sector. Ford, there are all sorts of things that Jayalalitha did. I think there's some rumors. I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but there's some rumors that she even reached out directly to the U.S. government to sort of lobby on behalf of Tamil Nadu to sort of nudge Ford to invest in Tamil Nadu as opposed to another state. Actually, initially when Ford was making its trying to make its decision, Tamil Nadu was, I think, third out of 3 locations that I was looking at, right? I think Maharashtra and one other state, I don't quite remember, were higher up, right? So there was a hill to climb, and actually the political leadership and the bureaucracy, those key agencies like guidance, TIDCO, et cetera, played a really important role, right? And being able to seize the opportunity that the liberalization brought. Likewise, I think that you could probably tell pick out some similar elements in the IT sector, right? So given the fact that, as Dr. Narayan said along back at the beginning, that, Tamil Nadu has had, a much more educated population for a long time now, it's only natural that, the IT sector that requires higher skills, especially in some of the areas where people were getting educated in Tamil Nadu, it's only natural that IT sector would thrive there, and the government, I think, rightfully recognized that. And as there's many IT SEZs that have been set up since the 1990s in and around Chennai, for example, right? So I think from the sort of leadership and governance aspect, certainly, I think that the liberalization opened up a window that then whoever was already prepared to walk through and whoever had the sort of the drive to walk through could, and I think that's what you see happened. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Karthik. Vivek, what are your views on that topic?
Yeah, I have not really looked at the industrial policy side of things as much, but the thing that I was glad about is that in the early periods of liberalization, at least, there were very strident voices that the only way in which you can have more investments and whatnot is by completely curtailing social welfare programs. And one of the first early steps that was done during liberalization in the early 90s was to say that you can't have universal PDS, you need to have highly targeted PDS. So Tamil Nadu introduced it, and due to political pressure, rolled it back within 2 weeks or so. And we've been at the forefront of saying that industrialization and growing the commercial side of our country should not come at the compromise of also making sure that everybody is able to partake in the economy and partake in opportunities. So that part, Tamil Nadu played a very important role in leading. Thankfully, there were also a whole bunch of other states where, because of deepening of democracy, states were under pressure to deliver not just to small pockets of industrialists, but to the vast majority of the population. But the fact that Tamil Nadu, among other states, played an important role in pushing back against this trend, in my view, has contributed to human development in important ways.
Thanks, Vivek. Dr. Narayan, what are your views on these kind of?
No, the particular period after the liberalization, if you look at 91, liberalization was substantially on the manufacturing side, industrial licensing side, and also the financial market side. That was the initial 91-93 liberalization package. But Tamil Nadu benefited in an indirect way, not directly due to liberalization, but that is a time when IT grew. When IT grew, and IT not just grew, it kind of exploded. So to relate just the liberalization exercise to the service sector growth in Tamil Nadu, I would say yes and no. It is coterminous in the sense that this growth, the GDP growth, the income growth, the kind of employment growth happened in Tamil Nadu simultaneously with the announcement of the liberalization policies in the center. But whether the liberalization policies actually increased manufacturing capabilities to the extent that they did in Gujarat or Maharashtra or Punjab or Haryana, I'm not so sure. I don't know. As I said, I don't really have not really looked at these numbers. Yeah.
Has anyone from our panel got any questions? Pugal sir, have you got any questions on this? Okay. One of the other things that I want to...
Can I ask a question to
go on.
So the thing is, sir, as you said, Narayan sir, as you said, from 1967, after 1967, there is a monumental shift of where there is a demand from the a bottom-up approach, a demand from the ground for the public delivery or whatever the need basis. So my question is, doesn't it give rise to a localism where which in itself becomes a hindrance for a state to expand its capacity, or it in itself becomes a hindrance in the path of creating a grand plan in achieving social goals? Then does localism itself becomes a problem?
Not really in the sense that you're talking about, but it is a problem in a very different way, because local issues occupy the collectors and the district officers' time very much more, and the local issues are not necessarily the state issues or even the region's issues. And I mean, I'm putting it politely, there's a lot of pressure on the district officers now to do what the local MLA is asking for or the local Panchayat Union chairman is asking for, rather than to look at the state level programs and focus on that and development. Yes, a lot of the district administration's time is nowadays spent on listening to local grievances and sorting out local grievances, which could be better spent in looking at state or national level plans and better delivery of the programs. Yes, it is true. It is very true.
Thank you, sir. So one of the other things that I want to talk about is what now?
How long are you going to go on?
Another 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes, sir. Sorry. Yeah. So because we wouldn't get this kind of a panel every day. So I just want to focus about what next. So what has happened so far has been good, but the challenges the new Tamil Nadu government faces are unprecedented. The coronavirus challenge, the fiscal responsibilities and all these things. So what do you think should happen next, or what do you think would happen next? How is the next 50 years going to be?
No, here, fiscal management is something which we will get around. We'll get around because good manufacturing base, good industrial base. So, in fact, I mean, Tamil Nadu is a GST exporting state. So, I mean, things will certainly come around. A good collection base, so things will come around. And I like the way that the present chief minister is talking about a balance between welfare and development. Okay, he's focusing initially on the welfare policies because naturally it's a COVID time, and okay, so he's giving a, but simultaneously looking at development. And I like the numbers. I like the fact that in terms of we are close to a zero poverty state. We are we are short of employable people. We have to import employable people from other states to do a lot of ground level jobs. So I'm extremely hopeful. We have to manage our finances a little better. And here, if it's a close this thing, I should say, talk a bit less and manage it better. I think we are getting a lot of talk in the last 2-3 weeks on the finances. Yeah.
So, I mean, going back to the period, and especially from the early 1900s to the 1950s, it was a period that was intellectually extremely exciting in India, and particularly in places like Kerala and Tamil Nadu and so on, where you had all kinds of different ideologies coming up with all kinds of visions as to how we need to go. Time has come where I think we also need to revisit that now, because the kind of poverty that we saw 30 or 40 years ago, where people worked, most people did not have access to education. You worked very long hours for 1 rupee of wages, or people working as padiyal, right, which is literally 1 measure of rice a day, maybe 1 piece of cloth that you get in a year, and so on. So that kind of poverty is gone for the most part. So today, with people in every village having opportunity, often to even get graduate education and so on, the kind of vision that we need to have needs to be revised quite a bit. The idea that we could have this achieved by development through large corporations, I don't think that that's going to take us too far. How do we move from that vision into something where people can participate in a meaningful way in very large numbers, where we have broad-based development? I don't think we have concrete ideas on how to go about it. And developing that vision, I feel like is very, very critical. While we do that, or rather, I think the best way to do that is for the state and for others to kind of develop this vision iteratively. It doesn't come from an ideology, I believe. It has to come from listening. It has to come from improving one small idea upon another small idea, and coming to a place where we have some kind of a concrete workable plan that also addresses the aspirations of the majority, rather than go for a vision of development that's going to make a few people extremely rich and the rest of them kind of complacent.
Karthik, your views, please. Final views.
Actually, all this while I've been thinking, oh, this is the question that I want to pose to Dr. Narayan. So I'm gonna pose a slightly different version of the question, which is, you mentioned public finance, but one thing that we see in Tamil Nadu, obviously, it's one of the better industrial performers historically. But if we look at sort of manufacturing share in employment, I think it peaked at something like 18%, and that was some years back, and it's been on the decline since then. And there's been a lot of work, globally around premature deindustrialization and all this, and we know, that the industrial sector can play an important role in terms of improving productivity, creating jobs, all this sort of stuff, right? So, what I'm concerned about to some extent for Tamil Nadu is how to reverse that trend, right? What is required, and how much of it depends on what happens at the center policy-wise, and how much can the state actually take, sort of evolve its model to try to sort of boost its industrial sector even further.
What I answer is not well researched. It's very much a personal impression. When I look around and I see in the last 2 years, there are 27 unicorns who have become billionaires, and only one of them is from Tamil Nadu. Then I look around and see capital formation, and I see that all big industries, except from the hereditary industries, people who have been there 30 years ago, 40 years ago, the TVSs and the Chittiars and other people, there are very few new industries which are coming up. I also see that youngsters, younger people, They are not willing to work on the factory floor. They'd much rather work in a call center than on a factory floor, even so the call center pays half. So I do worry. I do worry. And I do worry that the traditional employment in manufacturing is not really the cup of tea for the average Tamilian. And I see risk averseness. For example, you walk into a bank and you see half the people who have come as probationary officers, they don't belong to Tamil Nadu. They come from UP or Bihar or something like that. You see the IAS list of the list. Our boys are somewhere way down. This was not the case 20, 30 years ago. So somewhere we are losing a competitive edge and an appetite for risk. And this is what I worry about. Once we get this back, we'll go back to our 50s and 60s of growth. Ability to take chances, the ability to embrace change and industrialization, digitization, whatever it is. I see this dropping significantly. Why? Because people want a good middle class life. Okay, they want to buy their car, their scooter, they want a 2-bedroom house, they want to have a child in a good school. When they get married, have a child in a good school, and they want to look after their parents, full stop. Their life is done. I mean, you can't grow like that. You can't grow like that.
But sir, how do you feel that the present concerns which you have raised with respect to this employability and other issues, particularly pertaining to the state of Tamil Nadu's present financial situation, because we are facing an unprecedented financial situation with lakhs and lakhs of crores of debt and revenue deficit, plus tax collection has been removed out of the state's purview, and the central government is directly involved in this. So with this, the ability to raise capital or the ability to raise revenues for a state is very, very minimal. So how would you see this as an issue as far as the present issues are concerned?
Two ways of looking at it. Let's not forget that the GST took 7 years in making and it was accepted by all the states. Okay. The states, it's not that central government took away states' powers. Okay. The common pool was created by all the states together. And it is managed by all the states together. In the GST, there is no veto power of the center in the GST council. It has to be a consensus or a majority decision. In the end, the finance minister just hedges. So I would say much more the center has lost in taxation powers than the states have lost. If you look at the GST revenues of the states, Tamil Nadu was very worried, but actual revenues have not been so bad at all. But revenue raising for what? Revenue raising has to be, where are you going to put that revenue? If you have a revenue deficit, then your state cannot be helped. If you have fiscal deficit, then the state can be helped. If your day-to-day expenditure on interest payments as well as salaries and pensions are so much higher than your revenues, Tamil Nadu has one of the largest number of people paid out of government exchequer. You don't need them. You can easily deliver the same kind of services if you can get rid of 30% of the staff who are employed by the government and have the revenue surplus. But can you do it politically? Every village has ANMs, every village has a panchayat clerk, a village officer. There is a duplication of work at the village level. There are about 6 people employed in each village. You don't need them. So, but this has come government after government after government of delivering government employment to the village level. We have adopted a particular policy, and we don't need to. But nobody talks about expenditure control. Nobody talks about reduction of staff.
But expenditure control and reduction of staff, that's two views to it, because for example, in Tamil Nadu, or not only in Tamil Nadu, in many other states, there is also a view that there are serious shortage of staff. For example, in police department.
Yeah, sure. I don't know. But do you need an A&M? Do you need a, what shall I say, a village health officer? Do you need a village officer? Do you need an ayah? Do you need a cook? Do you need 7 people in one village? And all paid more than 3,000 to 4,000 rupees a month, and some are paid now. They are all demanding government salaries, which is a minimum of 10,000. A panchayat union, a village school teacher draws 35 to 40,000 rupees a month. Look at the pension bill. Is he delivering? I mean, are you getting, you as a citizen, are you getting the bang for the buck? The retirement pensions of a school headmaster are close to 25 to 30,000 rupees. Are you getting? Do you think this is something which Tamil Nadu can afford? If you take my extreme view, I would say abolish all pensions. You've been paid. You've been paid for the work you did. It's over. You go home. You take your lump sum and go home. Why would you pay for the rest of your life because you worked for 35 years for government? Think about it.
Oh. No, I do agree with your observations, but having 35,000 rupees salary for a village headmaster, or maybe a teacher or a professor drawing a salary of 1 lakh rupees and 1.5 lakh rupees. But particularly, I have an observation here, particularly in COVID times, when schools and colleges are shut, these teachers and professors are being paid full salary for sitting at home. Whereas the frontline workers like staff nurses and doctors, a staff nurse in the COVID ward gets only 14,000 rupees per month, whereas they are risking their lives. But that is an issue which has to be corrected. But that cannot be seen as a systemic issue. That cannot be seen as the issue of whole of Tamil Nadu. So
no, it is whole of Tamil Nadu because the correction becomes a political phenomenon.
I agree.
Election becomes if you increase nurses' salaries, then everybody, the secretariat peon will ask for a new, what shall I say, pay commission. So you can't handle, because you have created a huge vested, I would say, governmental employment system. Every bit of that is jockeying for higher benefits. So how do you solve it?
That is where we need to have bold decisions, plus our decisions and policies should be addressed through social justice principles. Because here what is happening is a frontline worker like staff nurse or anybody who is fighting COVID and risking their lives, socially that jobs are considered to be lower in hierarchy, whereas a teacher's job is considered to be higher in hierarchy. That is where the whole issue comes.
I agree with your sentiments. No doubt about it.
So I also have a slightly different point of view in terms of the number of people you require than Dr. Narayan has. I mean, I spent a lot of time with A&Ms, with panchayat secretaries, with a lot of other village cadre workers. Now, arguably, there are probably some departments in the state that have staff who are not used fully. But if you take an A&M, so the fact that we have more nurses in Tamil Nadu compared to, let's say, the nurse to doctor proportion is slightly higher in Tamil Nadu than lots of other states. And that contributes to our ability to deliver health services in very important ways and at costs that are far lower. A panchayat secretary has to manage a whole bunch of things within a village, from street lights to revenue collection to whatnot. So I don't think that a lot of the people who deliver services at the village level are earning far too much for the amount of work that they do. And without having that capacity, we will not be able to deliver the services that we want to. Which is not to say that maybe there are some departments where there are people who don't, whose time is not well used. But at least some of the ones that you picked out, I feel like they actually have their hands full and they actually play a very important role in making sure that people have longer lives, safer births, and better chance to get education, among other things.
So I think we can all agree that good economics doesn't always make good politics. So, so any final questions to the panel from anyone? Just conscious of time. Okay, well, sir, do you want to give the vote of thanks on behalf of DPF, please?
It's been a wonderful session, and really, really thankful to all the panelists. Professor Dr. Narayanan, who has taken his time out to come to our panel discussion and through lots of insights into the various aspects of governance, including we learned a lot about last mile delivery particularly. Thanks a lot, sir. Vivek Srinivasan and Karthik Akileswaran for joining from other parts of the country and world and enlightening us in this particular topic. We would like to have you in future in various discussion so that we can also throw some light on the policy governance for the state of Tamil Nadu. Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Enjoyed myself.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Thank
likewise.
you,
Thanks so much.
you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
It's very nice to meet all of you.
Yeah, likewise, Vic. Thanks, Dr. Nair.
Thanks.